Tonight, as two fragile ceasefires are tested, provocative words about the Middle East from Donald Trump.
There is no Palestinian, as far as I know, that can accept his deal, what he calls deal.
Plus, Israeli military actions in Gaza and Lebanon. As a deadline looms, new endorsements in the Liberal leadership battle.
I seem to be the choice of many of the Liberal MPs.
A hockey night in Canada mainstay, giving back after a devastating family loss.
This is probably the first time that I've actually exposed myself to how I feel.
My conversation with Scott Oake.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hennemanson.
Tonight, two ceasefires holding back some of the deadliest fighting the Middle East has seen in years are under pressure. In both cases, each side has accused the other of violating the terms of the deal. And in Lebanon, there's a temporary extension even after people were killed. Israeli soldiers opening fire on those approaching occupied villages in southern Lebanon, killing more than 20, according to local health officials. And in northern Gaza, Israel blocked the return of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to their shattered communities. The U.S. president says he's pursuing plans to clean out Palestinians from all of Gaza. He's speaking to leaders of Egypt and Jordan to get them to at least temporarily host Gaza's population. Chris Brown has the details.
A sea of people desperate to resume their lives amid Gaza's destruction tried to return to their neighborhoods in the north, only to be blocked because of disagreements between Israel and Hamas over the terms of the tenuous ceasefire. But as they waited, comments Donald Trump made on Air Force One about their future in Gaza ricocheted across the Middle East.
I mean, you're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing.
By clean out, Trump said Jordan and Egypt should permanently or temporarily build housing for Palestinians and they can live there instead. An incendiary suggestion, as hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were uprooted from their homes when Israel was created in 1948 and during subsequent wars. This is our country and our land and the land of our ancestors. We want to live and die on it, said Saya al-Sekwali. A Hamas official in Egypt also said Palestinian people will never leave the Gaza Strip. And Jordan's foreign minister gave a firm no. Whether Trump's comments represent a shift in U.S. policy is unclear. But this Israeli analyst who worked on the Oslo peace accords says displacement is the worst possible solution.
That there is no Palestinian, as far as I know, that can accept his deal, okay, what he calls deal.
Who should govern Gaza and how are the existential questions facing Palestinians and Israelis as both sides work to implement the ceasefire after a second successful hostage prisoner exchange Saturday. While Israelis celebrated, Benjamin Netanyahu's government has refused to discuss any long-term plan, and some in Tel Aviv said they fear without it, war will resume. Zif Shani is a retired Israeli Air Force engineer.
That's why we don't have to just to conclude, bring back the hostages. We have to think of the date of tomorrow and the next week.
And Ian, among the few groups who said they were pleased about Trump's comments about cleaning out Gaza were Israeli settlers who want the Palestinian land for themselves.
And Chris, there's been some movement on these disagreements over the ceasefire conditions.
That's right. Israel had wanted a civilian hostage, Arbel Yehud, released this past weekend, and when she wasn't, that's when they blocked away north for Palestinians. Now there's a deal. That woman and 2 other hostages will be released before Friday, according to mediators, and the Palestinians can continue on their journeys on Monday. Ian.
Chris Brown in Jerusalem tonight. The ceasefire in Lebanon got a last-minute extension today. But Jennifer Yoon shows us the pressure it's under is rapidly rising. In South Lebanon, anger at Israel's continued presence exploded, and Israel's soldiers responded with deadly force.
Some homes may have been reduced to rubble after the months-long Israeli invasion. But in South Lebanon, thousands are trying to return, even though the Israeli military hasn't withdrawn. Lebanon says Israel opened fire in several locations in the south, killing 22 and wounding another 124. Most were trying to go home, say Lebanese authorities, against warnings from the Israeli military that it's not safe to do so yet. Do not tell us it's forbidden to enter our villages, says this Lebanese man. Even if they don't withdraw, we will return, says another. Both Israel and Hezbollah were supposed to withdraw from South Lebanon during the 2-month ceasefire. That deal ended Sunday, but Israel's military has remained. The White House now says the ceasefire has been extended to the middle of February. Israel says Lebanon hasn't kept up its end of the deal. No Hezbollah fighters south of the Litani River, a stronghold for the Lebanese paramilitary group and political party for decades.
Hezbollah has also become politically stronger. Hezbollah has managed to infiltrate the Lebanese army in ways that it hadn't been able before. So it was very unlikely that the Lebanese army would be able to supplant the Hezbollah presence in the south.
The militant group is battered after Israel wiped out most of its leadership. But those who tried to enter occupied towns are still waving Hezbollah flags. Hezbollah says it's up to the Lebanese state to enforce the deal, but Israel says the group is heating up an already volatile situation. With the ceasefire now extended, it's unclear when people will be able to return home or whether war will come back first. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
A Canadian veteran who disappeared while visiting Afghanistan is now safe, according to Ottawa. David Lavery did humanitarian work in Afghanistan. Last November, he went missing, raising concerns he'd been taken by the Taliban government. In a social media post, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs said Lavery is in good spirits in Qatar, and she thanked her Qatari counterpart for helping facilitate his release. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Poland tonight ahead of Monday's ceremonies marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Trudeau will meet with some of the Auschwitz survivors. More than 1 million people were killed at the Nazi concentration camp. Trudeau will also hold bilateral meetings with the country's president and prime minister. And while Trudeau's out of the country, the race to replace him as Liberal leader is developing quickly. Today, one leadership hopeful was barred from even running. JP Tasker starts us off with the frontrunners and their battle for party support.
Mark Carney is stacking up high-profile endorsements in the race to replace Justin Trudeau as Liberal leader. Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne, a key organizer in Quebec, is the latest top Liberal to join Team Carney.
I think that together we could be a really great economic team for the country. This is a moment where we need to restore confidence in our country.
Here's the next leader of the Liberal Party, and I hope the next Prime Minister of Canada. Here's Mark Carney.
So far, 52 Liberal MPs have thrown their support behind the former Bank of Canada governor, compared to 26 for his main opponent, Chrystia Freeland.
I seem to be the choice of many of the Liberal MPs.
More than a dozen cabinet ministers are backing Carney, even though they worked closely with Freeland for years.
I do think that Mark offers a better chance to unite the country in standing up against tariffs.
Freeland, the former deputy prime minister and finance minister, says Carney gets that support because he's a Liberal insider.
It is certainly looking like Mark is the choice of the Liberal establishment. It is certainly looking like he is the PMO's candidate.
In a similar fashion, the Conservatives say the endorsements show things won't change if Carney gets the top job. Comments that led to this unusual confrontation.
Mr. Erskine Smith, who is just about to endorse him, the radical drug advocate. So I think that Canadians deserve answers. I think Canadians.
Welcome you to Beaches East York.
Thank you. I want to know what you promised Mark Carney.
I want to buy you a drink.
Perfect.
And
we want to know what Mark Carney promised Mr. Erskine Smith for his endorsement today.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has written to Carney demanding that he commit now to banning any prior Trudeau minister from serving in your cabinet.
I think he's scared is the first thing. Why is he writing me a letter on a Sunday morning?
The Liberal Party stepped in today to reject one of the leadership candidates. A spokesperson said MP Chandra Araya doesn't meet the criteria and is unfit for the role of party leader, but did not say why.
And JP, the deadline to register to vote in this leadership race is looming.
Yeah, Liberal supporters have until Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern to get their name on the voters list. Then the candidates will have just 6 weeks to identify supporters and bring them on side ahead of the vote in early March. And they all know it's not just Liberals who'll be paying attention. Ian?
JP Tasker in Ottawa. As the Donald Trump White House continues to deport illegal migrants, a real-time example today of how much depends on the countries they're being sent to. Late tonight, the U.S. says it's resolved a heated exchange of tariff threats with Colombia's president. Caroline Bargut takes us through a volatile day of international brinksmanship.
The U.S. continues to deport illegal migrants. Here, an emotional scene in Brazil after a long and miserable flight for a reported 80 people. This man says passengers like him were tied up with restraints on their waists and legs, treatment many there are condemning. But while countries like Guatemala have accepted flights, others, like Colombia and Mexico, have denied landing permission to U.S. military planes. On Sunday, Colombia's refusal set off an exchange of tariff threats. Donald Trump responded on his social media platform Truth Social, writing, "Emergency 25% tariffs on all goods coming into the United States. In 1 week, the 25% tariffs will be raised to 50%. Colombia's president fired right back. In his own post, Gustavo Petro said Colombia would impose tariffs of its own, not 25%, but straight to 50%. The president of the Colombian American Chamber of Commerce says the dispute should be resolved through normal diplomacy. Colombia's president appeared to offer some wiggle room, saying he would send a presidential plane to bring Colombian citizens home, saying they deserve the dignity not to be treated like criminals.
Sir, this is an executive order entitled Protecting the American People Against Invasion, which again deals with the southern border.
But in the U.S., the roundups continue. Last week, the U.S. president signed an executive order allowing ICE agents to enter churches and schools, something they were not allowed to do until now.
I desperately hope it has a chilling effect on illegal immigrants coming into our country.
You think the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are actively hiding criminals?
Trump has signaled he has no plans to let up, promising to have millions of undocumented people expelled from the country. Caroline Bargut, CBC News, Washington.
In response to possible U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods, at least 2 premiers say they may cut off the flow of American liquor to their provinces. As Yvette Brennan shows us, craft distillers see some opportunities.
Yeah, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey from Jim Beam.
BC Premier David Eby says if he has to, he'll stop Jack Daniels and Jim Beam at the border.
If they're not going to abide by our trade agreements, then neither are we.
They is the new U.S. administration. Donald Trump says he's considering a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, and Eby's threat is to bar access to the BC market for U.S. alcohol.
Our decision not to purchase American alcohol would definitely send a message. It is one of the things that could be on the table to respond to these tariffs. They are completely unjustified.
Walk into any Canadian liquor store and you will find American booze from California to Kentucky to Tennessee.
Why does every single restaurant have Jack Daniels? And why does every single restaurant have Maker's Mark in this? There's nothing unique about it at all. It doesn't power Canada's economy.
The head of Canada's Craft Distillers Industry Group hopes there may be a silver lining, an opportunity to boost the sales of Canadian-made spirits across Canada.
Sometimes it's harder to move stuff across the provincial border than it is to ship outside of Canada or bring inside of Canada, which is ridiculous.
He's referring to the many provincial regulations, taxes, levies, paperwork, and rules that are there to protect provincial industries but make it difficult to trade between provinces. People are restricted from exporting alcohol between provinces unless it's for personal use.
A lot of companies actually prefer dealing with the U.S. because that trades are actually less restrictive. There are fewer rules, and frankly, some of these markets are more lucrative.
And it goes both ways.
So about $400 million of alcohol comes up from the United States to Canada every single year. Canadians purchase about $110 million of American whiskeys.
He says the current rhetoric on tariffs is destabilizing for a hospitality industry that relies on certainty.
We could replace a large chunk of the products, but certainly not all of them.
But since a north-south trade war seems possible, it may open a door to a different trading environment, east and west. Yvette Brennan, CBC News, Vancouver.
South Korea's impeached president Yoon Suk-yeol has now been charged with insurrection. It's linked to his attempt last month to declare martial law, which threw the country into political turmoil. His trial is expected to take 6 months, and although he's being held, technically he's still president. Separate from Yoon's criminal charge, the country's constitutional court is deliberating whether to formally dismiss him. On the eve of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, calls are growing for mandatory Holocaust education in schools. With the number of survivors dwindling, Sam Sampson looks at some working to preserve crucial knowledge.
This is our reflection wall.
Holocaust education has always included critical thinking.
Have you fact-checked information? Do you check a source before you put it online?
Educators here and abroad say that's especially the case with the rising influence of social media.
I saw something on Twitter the other day that said, Hitler was right. And my stomach just turned. I think it's more important than ever that students and learners of all age be given the opportunity to learn what actually happened.
A major part of Holocaust education has included first-hand storytelling. But as survivors pass away, some of their younger relatives are there to answer questions.
I'd probably ask how it affected, the people around them.
Probably just ask them how they're doing, like if they've had any generational trauma from that. Generations passed down, stuff like that, yeah.
It's interesting.
Steve Schaefer's paternal grandparents survived forced labor camps during the Holocaust. His grandfather died with a tattoo from Auschwitz on his forearm.
I think that almost every Jewish person you talk to wonders who amongst the non-Jewish population around them would feel comfortable hiding them. So in terms of intergenerational trauma, I think almost all Jews suffer from that.
Schaefer pushed Alberta's government for mandatory Holocaust education in schools, something the province is still working on.
Without it, anybody could become the target of an organized, systematic policy whereby they're eradicated.
Schaefer says he won't be intimidated because more than fear, he has hope for the next generation. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
Some Rogers customers say they're being hit with unexplained price hikes.
It's a money grab.
How some are pushing back to get a better deal. Plus, how a new model of drone could change the war between Russia and Ukraine.
If we use fiber on the drone, we have not any signals which can be scanned by Russians.
And a Canadian takes top spot in the Downhill World Cup.
Boom! Canada have taken the lead! James Crawford!
We're back in 2. Make it 2 straight Australian Open titles for Jannik Sinner. The 23-year-old Italian beat Germany's Alexander Zverev Sunday in straight sets. The world #1 ranked Sinner becomes Italy's first player ever to win 3 Grand Slam crowns. When it comes to telco services, it's no secret that Canadians pay some of the highest rates in the world. But some consumers say they're also facing an uneven playing field when they try to dispute price hikes. In this Go Public investigation, Erica Johnson looks into why some people get a discount while others don't.
Okay, I'll have to phone them about that.
When Sharon Vincent saw a price hike on her Rogers bill just a month after signing a 2-year contract,
with Rogers Xfinity,
she called the telco provider to dispute the extra $21 in charges.
I wasn't able to get anything.
As Go Public has reported, last fall, Rogers raised the price of TV box rentals, allowed to hike prices thanks to a contract clause Vincent says wasn't explained.
I don't understand why they would do that. It's a money grab.
We heard from hundreds of angry Rogers customers who felt misled over the price hike. Now there's new grounds for outrage. Some got their bills lowered when they called to complain, but others, no luck.
I just think it's disgusting. You treat all your customers the same way if you want a good, successful business without a lot of complaints.
This MP says he's hearing complaints too from constituents, people who just don't have the time to do battle with Rogers.
It can be used against you as a consumer because you don't get the same benefits that other people that have those skill sets or have that experience or have that time will get.
Frustrating, he says, because big telcos like Rogers have received hundreds of millions from government over the past decade.
So we're being abused by our own product.
Even before the price hike, Rogers customers were fed up with their bills. A recent report from the telco mediator shows that complaints about billing issues jumped over the past year, up 103%. A spokesperson for Rogers wouldn't comment on why some customers get a break and others don't, but said the company works with customers to meet their needs and budget. After we contacted Rogers about Sharon Vincent's case, she called her telecom provider again. Says this time a customer service rep could miraculously knock $18 off her bill. Erica Johnson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Our Go Public stories come from you. If you have a tip for the team to investigate, send an email to gopublic@cbc.ca. New drone technology is being tested for warfare by Ukraine.
You're not putting this genie back in the bottle.
Why they're more effective at evading enemy defenses. And
hello and welcome to Hockey Night in Canada Presents.
Scott Oake opens up about his son's fight with addiction.
Imagine standing over somebody with cancer and saying, "What are you doing with that cancer? Just get rid of it."
His message for others in the same situation. The National breaks down the stories shaping our world. Next. Coast Guard icebreakers from both sides of the border combined forces to free a Canadian freighter stuck for days in the frozen waters of Lake Erie. The Manitoulin became trapped in the ice Wednesday after dropping off a load of wheat in Buffalo. A U.S. Coast Guard cutter is now escorting the ship to Sarnia, Ontario, where it will remain until spring. Western France is dealing with flooding following strong winds and rain. Rivers have burst their banks, creating scenes like this. No major injuries, though, have been reported. Ukraine's drone attack on a Russian oil refinery sparked a devastating fire last night, the latest sign that those tiny craft play a major role in the conflict. Briar Stewart got incredible access as Ukraine tests a way to make its drones even deadlier by making them harder to stop.
These soldiers, who were only identifying by their Ukrainian military call signs, have been launching drones at Russian targets for much of the war. Now they're testing a new model which some believe could be a game changer. So far with this technology, we can bypass all jamming systems, says one soldier who goes by the call sign Crab. If you look carefully, trailing behind a thin fiber optic cable, it stays attached to the base station, giving an uninterrupted signal. Ukraine and Russia have increasingly used small, relatively inexpensive drones to target each other, but drone jammers which interrupt the radio communication between the drone and the operator can cause them to go off course. Cabled drones, which can also carry munitions like grenades, are immune to that. Inside this production facility, Vlad, who we're only identifying by his first name for security reasons, shows how he's designing the drones to get them to fly further.
It is our spool. It is fiber inside.
And so the cable would just unwrap?
Yeah, like a fishing line, but not so strong as fishing line. If we use fiber on the drone, we have not any signals which can be scanned by Russians.
And the only surefire way to bring them down is to shoot them out of the sky.
Keep you guys posted on
Troy Smothers is a former U.S. Marine who's been working to help test the drones.
But it's going to take a little probing.
Well, the drones being used by both Russia and Ukraine have a range of about 20 kilometers. Others that can fly further are currently being tested. But as the technology develops, it will have wider implications. Last year, when U.S. officials were concerned that rogue drones could target the Super Bowl, they had jamming equipment on standby. That won't work with cable drones, and shooting them out of the sky is often not an option in crowded public places.
You're not putting this genie back in the bottle. They're already looking for effective countermeasures to go against fiber. And it is, warfare always evolves.
And that's evident in Ukraine, which has become a key testing ground. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Kharkiv.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. Preserving the past through technology and testimony. The stories of Holocaust survivors shared for future generations.
I have a picture here that was given to me when I returned from the camp after liberation.
But first,
grief is like a 10-pound brick in your pocket. Some days it's heavier than others.
Veteran Canadian sportscaster Scott Oake opens up about his own loss in his new memoir.
I never know when it's going to get me. It could be if I hear a song on the radio, when I pick up that book.
I sat down with Scott to discuss his book and how he's helping others fight addiction.
He was diagnosed at the age of 8 or 9 with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which made him ripe for taking chances, and there weren't many he didn't take. Consequences be damned, and clearly believed that that had something to do with his descent into substance abuse disorder, or addiction, as we call it.
This is a book about your son. It's a book about you and your wife and your other son, Darcy. I want to ask you about yourself for a moment, because literally on the last page of this book, you write that grief can get the better of a person. Certainly if you lose your son and your wife, and she passed away just a few years ago. My grief hasn't, although I have my moments. So I can't say I've risen above my grief, only that I carry on. How do you carry on?
I carry on because I have Darcy and his wife Leslie, and they have 2 beautiful children, my grandchildren, August and Harlan. Some days are easier than others, I would say that. Again, I'll quote Darcy. He nailed it, I thought, when he said, grief is like a 10-pound brick in your pocket. Some days it's heavier than others. But you do your best.
And you're still feeling it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just that question, right, has triggered some emotion in me. I never know when it's going to get me. It could be if I hear a song on the radio, when I pick up the book, and I have a number of times, and I'll flip to a certain page, and I got to put it down. Imagine that. I can't read my own book. But it's just the way it is, and you figure out how to manage it, and I guess I have, yeah.
I think we don't talk enough about grief in our society, especially maybe men, that they need to be stoic. What kind of reaction do you get to being open about grief?
Well, this is probably the first time that I've actually exposed myself to how I feel, in the book. But when Bruce first passed away, I would say thank you and try to change the subject. I suppose any professionals looking at this would think that I am the worst case example of someone trying to deal with grief, because, it's the old stiff upper lip. You just carry on. I took 1 weekend off and went right back to work, as I just felt that was the best way to do it. Just carry on. And sure, there'll be people watching this saying, well, you should have, let time pass, and you should have dealt with your grief. But that's how I dealt with it, and I guess continue to deal with it.
This book is hard to read. What was it like to write it?
Very difficult. I've been asked if it was cathartic, and I would say it's probably the furthest thing from that. Reliving Bruce's journey, in particular the last 4 years of his life, through the written word was very difficult. One of the jokes I made during the writing of the book was, will I be the first author to get PTSD from his own book? It's a joke, of course. I mean, there was a purpose in writing the book, but it wasn't easy.
What was the purpose?
I began to think that it would be not a bad idea, because it would let other families who are going through crises like we did to know they're not alone, and that it would help bring attention to the opioid crisis and what we need to do about it. Okay, So this is the Addams family portrait, some photo studio where they had a special. Just looking like an ordinary, normal family. And the day he was born.
What should we know about Bruce Oake?
Bruce was a precocious kid. He was the perfect baby. I remember when he was 3 or 3.5, we were in front of the house playing street hockey, and I was telling him, like any father would, this is how you hold the stick, this is how you shoot, this is how you stick handle, and pretty soon he'd had it with me. At that point, he'd realized that he could watch me on TV on a nightly basis doing the local sports, talking about all manner of sports.
The fans have packed Dodger Stadium all week long. The NHL will be a 21-team league next season. Hello and welcome to Hockey Night in Canada Presents. I'm Scott Oake.
But he incorrectly assumed that I should be an expert at all of them. And so he stopped cold during this day playing street hockey. He looked up to me and he said, you know, Dad, if you know so much about it, you should be playing it, not just talking about it. So he was that kind of kid.
Hi, Bruce.
Hey, Dad, turn around.
Are you kidding?
He was diagnosed at the age of 8 or 9 with ADHD.
There's Bruce.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which made him ripe for taking chances, and there weren't many he didn't take. Consequences be damned. And clearly believed that that had something to do with his descent into substance abuse disorder, or addiction, as we call it.
Yeah, he's obviously much more than someone who is addicted to drugs, but that addiction was something that consumed him and for a long time consumed your family.
Yeah, it did. It was a horrid journey for the last 4 or 5 years of his life. He was on that cycle of active addiction, recovery, relapse. He went to detox, I think 9 or 10 times. He went to treatment centers 4 times. He tried his best, but he never really came to terms with the fact that he had to do it for himself. He always went more for us than for himself. And as a result, addiction or substance abuse claimed his life. People would believe that using drugs is a choice that you make, but addiction is a disease. When we wrote Bruce's obituary, our first decision was to not hide behind what had claimed his life, because we didn't think that there was any shame in that. The first line of Bruce's obituary reads, "Tragically, Bruce Oake lost his battle with addiction at the tender age of 25. And that got a lot of reaction, and in a way was the genesis of the grandiose project that became the Bruce Oake Recovery Center.
This is the moment that we as the Oake family have been super excited to share with all of you, the Bruce Oake Recovery Center.
People need to realize that addiction is a disease. Imagine standing over somebody with cancer and saying, what are you doing with that cancer? Just get rid of it. Just stop having it. You know, I just hope that people will come to realize that it is a disease and we need to approach it accordingly.
The problem with treatment is it needs to be available when the person is ready for it, on their terms. And it's pretty clear in this book that that has not been the case in this country.
There aren't nearly enough recovery beds in this country. And until there are enough beds available to service people who want recovery and want it at that particular time, then this problem will persist. But you do what you can. And so that's the nature of the Bruce Oake Recovery Center. There's 50 beds there. And at any given time, there are 50 men there reclaiming their lives, to allow them to go back to their families, their loved ones, their jobs, and society in general, and I guess continue to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. You go to the Bruce Oake Recovery Center every day when you're in Winnipeg?
Yes. I usually try to get there for lunch from Monday to Thursday and meet as many of the participants as I can. You know, I'm fascinated by their stories, but I'm inspired by the place more than anything. You can feel that it's a place of love and that men are there to get their health back.
There's so much in this book. If I were to ask you to isolate one message you hope this book sends to people in Canada, what would it be?
That recovery is possible. It wasn't for Bruce. He tried. You know, there's an expression in addiction and substance abuse disorder that you got to hit rock bottom. Sadly, for some people, rock bottom is death, and it was for Bruce. But this book, I hope, makes the point that a life free of drugs and alcohol can be attained if you work on yourself, if you do the right things, and if you make the proper decisions. And as I always say to the guys at graduation ceremonies at Bruce Oake, use the tools you've acquired here over your 16 weeks, and you can have a good life.
We have done so many stories on the drug addiction and poisoning crisis in Canada, and Bruce Oak's story is just one of hundreds, thousands of tragedies in this country. The book certainly is worth a read. Next Sunday are the Grammys. Prince will be honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award 6 years after his death from fentanyl poisoning. I spoke with Toronto guitarist Donna Grantis, who was a member of the Music Legends band for 4 years. Here's a preview.
I was given a short list of songs to prepare, and then I had a one-way flight booked to Paisley Park.
Paisley Park, the headquarters for Prince, where he had a soundstage, among other things, a studio, I assume, living quarters. What was it like walking in there?
It was so inspiring. I was excited. I was so excited because it was, the opportunity that I had, dreamed of. And, Prince walked in and we introduced ourselves and then very quickly just started playing. The sound of 2 electric guitars is incredible. And to be playing for that other guitarist, to have been Prince, was just mind-blowing.
You can catch the full interview and some mind-blowing guitar playing next Sunday right here on The National. A Holocaust survivor shares his story in a manner that ensures it will live on beyond his years.
I have a picture here that was given to me when I returned from the camp after liberation.
How holograms are being used to teach younger generations. The innovative project to document the Holocaust through the voice of survivors.
Coming back, how do you pick up the pieces?
A collection of personal stories captured for the future.
What do you think of your hologram?
It feels a little strange.
To ensure the lessons of the past are never forgotten. Joanna Remiliotis went behind the scenes with Canadian Max Eisen, whose story was digitally archived before he passed away.
We are ready.
Max Eisen survived the nightmare of his past by looking forward. Now he's come here to step back in time and relive it over and over again.
My name is Max Tibor Eisen. I was born on March the 15th, 1929, in a town called Moldova nad Bodvou in Czechoslovakia.
This is the extraordinary process of bringing history to life.
I was a busy kid. I went to public school. I went to Hebrew school.
A 26-camera setup in the Los Angeles studio, designed to capture every angle of Max's testimony as a Holocaust or show a survivor, to preserve his story and turn it into a living one.
At first, I sort of thought it was kind of eerie, and that means the end of life, and you're only on a wall there. But I've sort of come to realize that this is a new technology, and it just could do a very big, important job.
How were you affected by your experience in the Holocaust?
Well, it was the loss of family. It was a whole new ballgame, as they say, coming back. How do you pick up the pieces?
Max is the 25th survivor to be interviewed by the University of Southern California's Shoah Foundation with the purpose of creating a hologram, or a three-dimensional interactive image. It will be installed in museums, brought to schools. Anyone who touches a screen can ask Max a question, and his hologram will answer it.
We train the software behind the system to understand sets of questions so that when you come up with your own unique individual way of asking a similar question, the software behind it uses machine learning to say, oh, I know this question, and I know that this question means this answer.
Obviously, did the Holocaust affect your faith? Yes, obviously we need that one. How can you...
Kia Hayes is in charge of the project. She and her team have come up with nearly 1,000 questions to cover off what anyone might ask Max.
Why do you think the Holocaust happened? Why didn't more people help Jews during the Holocaust?
They come at you with all these millions of questions, and you can't think out what are you going to say. You need to be fast, and I think that's the best way I can perform. You know, I hear a question, I just give them an answer right away.
Max, can you share your picture with us?
Yes. I have a picture here that was given to me when I returned from the camp after liberation.
So much of his story is about loss.
And you will see my father and my beautiful mother, and in the center, myself.
A young boy, once nestled in a large, loving family, the only one to survive the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp.
Simply losing your entire family, and how do you pick up the pieces? And grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, they simply disappeared, and a year later, they were not there.
The whole exercise is grueling.
There are certain things that I cannot talk about for my own self-preservation.
When you were recounting these very awful details, you're not emotional. Is that deliberate?
Yes, it is deliberate. I don't want to break down, and I don't want to make anybody cry. I want them to learn. You see, and I know there are some survivors that cry, and everybody else is crying with them. So that's not my way of doing things, you see. Pingus, what do you think of your hologram?
It feels a little strange when I watch myself, but I feel that it's so important. The actual project is so important.
A fellow Canadian survivor, Pinkas Gutter, was the prototype.
It's actually quite difficult for me both to do it, to relive what I'm talking about.
Taking part in this project means Max will continue his work after he's gone.
This is amazing to me, you know, to hear this.
How do you feel about the fact that you're going to be on a screen like that at the end of this process?
I hope that I'll be giving the right answers, you know. So I think it's amazing. It will be gone, and we'll be still speaking to you from the other side. And who would have thought such a thing can happen? Mission accomplished.
Max Eisen passed away in 2022 at the age of 93. He'll be honored Monday alongside other survivors and the many victims of Auschwitz 80 years after the camp's liberation. Coming up, history repeats itself on the slopes of Austria.
Canada, 1-3. Who'd have thought?
A new generation of Canadian skiers makes a statement next in our moment. Canadians Jack Crawford and Cam Alexander getting some well-deserved praise after finishing first and third respectively in the World Cup downhill at Kitzbuhel, Austria. The double podium finish at that course hasn't been done by a Canadian duo since 1983, when a group known as the Crazy Canucks pulled off the same feat. So tonight, that repeat on the world stage, 4 decades in the making, is our moment.
James Crawford has knocked it out of the park. That is amazing!
I'm still a little bit in shock. Hopefully tonight when I'm lifting the Kitzbuhel trophy overhead, then it'll feel totally real. And yeah, to celebrate it with a teammate in third, it's incredible.
Cam Alexander is absolutely flying. This could be a podium. Here he comes, let's have a look. Boom! Second place, that's amazing!
I always felt like 2 of us were going to be on the podium, so to have it finally happen, you couldn't have written it up any better.
James Crawford of Canada. History in the making if he holds this together. Is he going to get there? Boom! Canada, 1-3. Who'd have thought?
The Crazy Canucks kind of set the blueprint, so for us to be able to do that again after 40 years, I mean, it's crazy. We just want to keep pushing things further, you know?
So it's not just a throwback in terms of history. Jack Crawford says that the Crazy Canucks, at least a couple of them, have been very supportive of him, so there's a real connection there. If you don't know the Crazy Canucks, look them up online. 4 straight years, 3 different Canadian men's skiers won gold at Kitzbuhel, 1980, 81, 82, 83. Ken Reid, Steve Podborski, and Todd Brooker. It was a real golden moment for Canadian skiing. Thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the Nationals YouTube channel. I'm Ian Hennemansing in Vancouver. Good night.